to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, July 22nd, 2015, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday and another wacky weekend here in our summer months, as it were. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick program note, next Tuesday, the 28th, our on-air guest is going to be Michael Everett of Fortress Survival, because I've noticed that people being prepared to be off the grid in the event of an economic societal collapse seems to be fading from the public awareness, and I think maybe it's time for a reminder that you do need to be prepared to take care of yourself, because Big Daddy government that you are forced to be dependent on is proving to be very undependable indeed. Now, before we get into the news here, I want to sort of follow up on my rant yesterday, and I got a lot of email from people saying you're perfectly right to be angry at the state of hardware and software. It's crud. I had a business. I had all these problems, and spending all my time fixing the problems rather than getting useful work done. Now, the story what I had with Time Warner Oceanic has a happy ending. And I guess there are advantages to being a popular talk radio host, because it wasn't all that long after I ended yesterday's show that I got a call from a couple of very high-up technical supervisors at Oceanic right here in Hawaii, guys who really obviously knew what they were talking about, and they sorted out my problems. And it basically, in a nutshell, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth, when the cable modems are shipped to customers, they're presuming the customers are all end users downloading media content, and the modems are pre-configured to support the selling of additional services and products and so forth in the home. They're basically geared for everybody's on a tablet or a smartphone or just watching stuff that's delivered, and actually doing stuff online is out there. They can switch the mode of the cable modem to something that's a little bit more professional. That has to be done from their end. I can't do it within the interface here. So they switched it over. I've got blazing fast speed. I'm not losing my connections. I'm very happy. And so I'm going to pat Time Warner Oceanic on the head for getting this fixed, and then, of course, flicking underneath their nose for not really having their support staff over in the Caribbean able to deal with people like me who, in Time Warner's view, I'm not normal. I'm not a normal Internet customer. I'm doing things like Telnet and FTP and all these other core Internet functions that real consumers don't do that sort of thing. So anyway, happy ending to that story. All right, now, as you probably have already heard, because it's all over the corporate media, in between more about Bill Cosby. We are being so conditized. Dylan Roof has been indicted on federal hate crime charges in relation to the Charleston shooting. They are back to pounding racism, because he was white and they were black and he went in. And again, this still feels like this was staged to fan up race hate as a political issue for next year's election. Because every time there's an election, we can count on the powers that be to try and create a bunch of fringe issues to get Americans to argue about, so they're not talking about things both political parties are perfectly in agreement on, which is an economy designed to loot ordinary people and endless wars of conquest that, to be very honest and objective, are not going very well at all. So anyway, Dylan was indicted on 33 federal counts, including hate crime charges. And you need to keep in mind, Dylan was on medications known to trigger violence. Witnesses at the scene said he seemed very conflicted, like he was about to do something he didn't want to do. And don't forget, at the end of it all, he tried to kill himself, like the good little Manchurian candidate he was programmed to be, but he'd run out of bullets. It's like Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. He wasn't supposed to survive this, so there's no conflicting variations on the story. But they've got another survivor, and they're getting out the charges, and they're going to railroad him into whatever he's doing here. Now, while the American media is focused on domestic shootings and demonizing guns and ignoring the link to psychiatric medications on all this, I've noticed that international news is starting to kind of fade away from the American TV news feeds. We're not getting a lot of information about what's going on over in Greece, over in Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, Kiev is continuing to violate the Minsk Accords. The U.S. is saying this is all Putin's fault. We're going to ramp up the sanctions. And now we're hearing, courtesy of Russia Today, there are growing rumors that there may be a new Ukrainian revolution against Poroshenko and the installed U.S. puppet regime. And, of course, if that happens, we know what's going to go on. The U.S. is going to scream democracy, ISIS, terror, whatever, and reinvade Ukraine to slap those people down and say that once we give you a U.S. puppet ruler, you will learn to love and obey them. Same thing they're doing in Yemen, same thing they're doing in Libya, same thing they're doing in Iraq. Once you're under U.S. puppet rule, you will stay there. You're not allowed to leave according to these rules that we just made up. But apparently there is a growing movement around Kiev that Poroshenko's government has been more bad than good. Gee, you think? And they're starting to have rallies, and that is not being reported here in the American media, because any time we bring the blessings of U.S. government to a nation, we can't ever let it be seen that they're unhappy about that. They greet us with flowers. They're going to kiss our invading troops. Remember when they were actually saying that during the second invasion of Iraq? Oh, they'll be greeting us with flowers and open arms and smooches. And they had a picture of U.S. troops being kissed on all the big news magazines, and then somebody realized the guy doing the smooching, it was all the same guy who was part of the new installed U.S. puppet regime. Now, Kyrgyzstan has reacted very badly to Washington, D.C. giving a human rights prize to an activist serving a life sentence in Kyrgyzstan for killing a police officer. And as a result, they are simply canceling the cooperation treaty they've had with the U.S., which gave the U.S. a foothold along Russia's southern border. Now the U.S. is in a panic out there saying, you can't cancel this. We'll stop giving you money and weapons here. And apparently Kyrgyzstan's attitude is, well, if we cancel this agreement with you, we're not going to need your weapons because we're not going to be a front in the coming war with Russia. So once again, this U.S. foreign policy of encircling Russia and provoking a war has hit a major pothole in the road. Now, John McCain is up in arms, and not about Donald Trump, because apparently Saudi Arabia just entered into a deal with Russia for future arms sales. And Saudi Arabia is basically saying, we're under no obligation to go to any one provider. We're going to go to whoever's got the best weapons at the lowest price. And, of course, the U.S. response is, how dare you buy working Russian weapons for half the cost of buying our worthless junk? That's not the way it's supposed to work. And so John McCain is out there screaming that the Saudis, the relationship with Saudi Arabia is going downhill, which would actually be a good thing probably for both countries if that were to happen. But this coalition around the petrodollar is beginning to crumble. Now, over in Israel, having so far failed to block the Iran deal, they're looking for something else to whine about. Because, Israel, they got to have something to whine about all the time. Iran, Nazis, Hitler, Holocaust. And now they're basically calling on governments around the world to cut all funding for any organization Israel says is anti-Israel, meaning primarily the boycott, divestment movement, which Israel has now declared as big a threat to Israel as Iran's nuclear weapons, which is sort of true when you remember Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Everything seems to be working there. Now then, not too long ago in Israel, there was an integrated school in Jerusalem, Jewish, Arab, and it was burned down. Actually, they burned a classroom down. The rest of the school was still okay. And apparently the Jerusalem District Court finally cracked down on these two brothers who set fire to the school. They were offended at the idea that Arabs be allowed to study with the Jewish students, and they were sentenced to 2 and 2.5 years in prison for that. Meanwhile, apparently 3 Israelis have been arrested in relation to the hack of J.P. Morgan and some security frauds. Apparently they've arrested 4 people in Israel and Florida yesterday in connection with several fraud schemes tied to last summer's massive data breach at J.P. Morgan Chase and Company. Compromised information on 83 million households and small business accounts, making it one of the largest such breaches in history. So, hey, I guess the NSA is off the hook for that one. There's some good news for you over there at the Spook Palace here. Meanwhile, up in New Jersey, they have now doubled the state taxpayer-funded allocation for Holocaust survivors living in New Jersey. Now, I agree that people in circumstances of distress need a helping hand from their fellow citizens. But they're making a big deal over the fact that this is specific money allocated for Holocaust survivors, of which there aren't very many left just because of the effects of time. Why isn't Israel paying for this? Why isn't Germany paying for this? Why is it always for the Americans to clean up this mess from before we were all born? It just seems like it's a never-ending siphon away from the American people at a time when we can't even afford to take care of ourselves. Our bridges are collapsing. Our roads are crumbling. Our infrastructure is in serious disrepair. And we're not responsible for whatever it is that happened or did not happen in Germany before we were all born. Of course, as we know from the recent kerfuffle over Greece, Germany's not in the habit of repaying its debts to other countries. Greece is supposed to. You're supposed to. Germany, no. Politically incorrect. Now, there's a story that came out of Zero Hedge. A lot of attention is being focused on China, that has apparently been very quietly getting out of their U.S. Treasury exposure. And looking at the charts, it's basically come out China's change in foreign exchange reserves is entirely the dumping of U.S. Treasuries. I'm not even sure who's dumb enough to buy them at this point. Maybe the Federal Reserve is buying them back to try and keep demand and keep the value up, because they print their own money over there. But these other countries are getting out of their dependence on U.S. Treasuries, and once they're no longer locked into the U.S. Treasuries, they are independent economies. And that is the real threat. Now, a lot of people are talking about this massive drop in gold prices over the last weekend. The economic pundits and the corporate media were out there saying, see, gold is not a place you should put. You shouldn't be getting a messy yellow metal. It's ugly and it's heavy and, you collects dust. You really don't want to be in there. And to nobody's surprise, it turns out that last Sunday, $2.7 billion, with a B, of paper gold contracts were dumped on the market. This is manipulation. They just keep making up more of these paper gold contracts, flooding the market with them. They blend the value of the paper gold contracts with the value of the real metal in order to hold it all down. We actually talked about this a year ago on America's Book of Secrets on the History Channel. And back then when we put it out there, a lot of people say, oh, don't be ridiculous, the bankers wouldn't do that. Well, here we've got it. They can make up those paper gold contracts out of thin air, just like they make the Federal Reserve notes. And they keep putting them out there and putting them out there, and they've created a huge paper gold bubble. They don't have the gold to redeem it. But they're treating it as if it's real gold, and they won't give you the gold. They'll just give you another contract, or they'll give you more of the ink and paper Federal Reserve notes to try and settle it. Anybody who wants to redeem their gold contracts for the real gold, they're being bought off, saying, well, we can give you the gold or we can give you its cash equivalent plus 25-30%. Most people are going for the deal. But this is very obvious manipulation to keep the price of gold down, because they don't want you closing your savings account or selling your stocks and buying physical silver and gold, because then your money is not under their control. And remember what we said earlier in the week, there's all this talk about banning cash outright. That's only going to work if they ban physical silver and gold at the same time. The only way a cash ban works is if they ban any other possible store of value that you might take your little plastic bank card in and say, empty the savings account and give me its equivalent in silver, gold, ammunition, whatever. Which is why ultimately a cash ban is not going to work. It's going to harm the suckers who go along with it, but those who understand that they don't want their wealth in the bank will simply find some other way to store their wealth. Something universally negotiable, recognizable as having value, and that's what they'll do. Now we're seeing another article, this is over at Zero Hedge again, where Wall Street looks like it's getting ready to ride another financial crash and make billions of dollars off of it. Seeing a lot of the big players are starting to move back into derivatives to make fortunes off a coming crash. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many crashes. The way the laws are written, Wall Street insiders, CEOs, these big banks, can actually make huge amounts of money off of an economic crash that wipes everybody else out. We've literally created a financial incentive for these money junkies to wreck the system every once in a while, because they come out of it much better off, either through derivatives, bailouts, whatever. We need an economic system that rewards success and performance, not chicanery and failure. If you incentivize failure, you get more failure, because failure's a lot easier. And that's a big problem. Now, we're going to take another break for commercials. When we come on back, apparently Dodd-Frank is under attack again from the Republicans. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, 5 years ago, there was legislation passed called the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Package. Now, 5 years ago, when it was passed, it was already the subject of much controversy. The money junkies said they didn't need to be regulated. Those who said that the money junkies do need to be regulated said that Dodd-Frank didn't go far enough. What finally passed was a thin shell of what was originally intended. It was mostly gutted on launch, and now Republicans want to get rid of what's left of it completely. And they're trying to do that by equating it with Obamacare, what a complete, utter failure that was, and no argument on that one. Basically saying that Dodd-Frank was constraining the financial services industry and reducing their choices of what they could do. Well, yeah, but looking at how the financial services industry has worked ever since the repeal of Glass-Steagall, I think in this case it's definitely necessary. There has to be some kind of control. We, the people, should be in control of the national economy, not the bankers, because history has proven, without exception, when bankers control the economy, they're using it to make money for themselves and could care less what happens to we the people. Now, Russia Today is reporting on a meeting that has taken place between BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, a summit that has also had an informal meeting with the Eurasian Economic Union about pulling all of these alternative financial systems in under a single control, at which point it would rival the Western-dominated financial system. The fact that they even got this group of people together to talk is a very graphic indicator that the rest of the world is turning away from this dollar-dominated private central banking model. They've had enough of it. As well they should. Now, there's a very interesting article that came out over at Counterpunch, checking in with Joe the plumber, and they're harking back to the 2008 campaign where they picked out this guy, Samuel Joseph Wurzelbacher, Joe the Plumber. He was basically plucked out of ordinary people by John McCain to be paraded around as Joe the Plumber, supposedly to represent the voice of ordinary American people. The problem was that Joe came across as arrogant and ignorant at the same time, coming to embody the current view of America's so-called exceptionalism. Because we're seeing that more and more as a result of changes to our educational system that puts the emphasis on building self-esteem and not actually teaching kids anything. The image of Americans around the world is now that of an arrogant, blustering moron who doesn't know anything about science, math, engineering, let alone politics, and yet continues to parade around as if they are the voice of authority on anything that's going on anywhere in the planet. And we may see more of the same going into this next campaign, but it is a reality. And I get this in a lot of emails from foreign readers when I was still working in other countries, way back in the 1980s and 1990s. You know, I was getting this told to my face, you Americans are. And they were kind enough to say, we're telling you this because you're the obvious exception. You're very well informed for an American, which was still a slap in the face, I think. But that's the image that America is putting out there now. Arrogant, unshakable sense of supremacy based on absolutely nothing. And it is a problem. All right, we're going to take ourselves a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Imperial hubris. When Americans take a crap, it's red, white, and blue.
Whom the gods would destroy, they first make proud.
Yeah, I mean, there is an arrogance in this country. From people, there's a percentage of people that are arrogant, attitude. I believe that.
Well, it's been going on for a long time. The so-called arrogant American, and a lot of it does go back to the end of World War II, where the U.S. was acting like they had won World War II all by themselves, which is, of course, nonsense. But during the 1950s, when we were this industrial powerhouse, supplying the rest of the world with machine tools and ball bearings and everything else, there was a certain justification for being proud about being from the United States of America. But that foundation that might have justified such pride and arrogance, that's gone. The United States can't make any products anybody wants to buy unless their arms are twisted by some trade agreement. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. The rest of the world is looking at our declining economy, our declining infrastructure, and they're saying, you know, you should be more modest, Americans, because you've got lots to be modest about. And it's just not taking. And part of it, of course, is our political leadership are very full of themselves, and people seeing them constantly on media, they're going to emulate that, even though it's completely unjustified.
Well, it's a declining empire in general, the whole West.
No question. It's dying. It's just looking for a place to fall down and flop around a bit.
Hey, Mike, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. So
yes.
People need to be proactive, not reactive, and buy some gold, silver bars, and store them under your deck in a plastic PVC pipe glued with both ends, put in the ground. I mean, people need to not wait till the day after. That's why Russia's been buying gold and China's dumping the treasuries. They're not going to wait till the day after.
No, they're not. Look what happened in Cyprus. When the people of Cyprus found out about the haircut, it had already happened. And, Americans need to wake up and realize that when push comes to shove, the government will pass whatever laws are going to transfer the wealth of the people to the money junkies, because the money junkies will share the loot with the government. We've seen it before. Throughout history, even the history of the United States of America, that government will always side with the financial powers against the people. That is the essence of fascism. And sometimes it's worse than other times, but it's unprecedented levels now.
Well, yeah, the people need to realize, if the government loved you, they wouldn't have outsourced your jobs, lied about your wars, lies about the economy. And then people still, the percentage of people still go, rah, rah, rah. You know, it's like they're just in denial, you know.
They absolutely are. You know, they're running around with these signs taped to the back of their shirts saying, "Kick me." You know, "Thank you, Master. May I have another one?" I mean, that's literally a continuation of that whole thing, that no matter how much the government abuses you, you are supposed to go on loving them and worshiping them and obeying their every dictate. Well, I think those times are gone. Outside of the very obvious employees of the government, public relations firms, and other assorted propagandists, I see very, very few people, even within the military, who are proud to be Americans and think that we're a good nation. As a matter of fact, as of the last poll, 57% of Americans think the U.S. economy is only going to get worse.
Well, people need to realize we are in historic times because you got the BRICS, the Shanghai Co-op, you got the AIIB, and you know we're at a crossroads, people, and get your house in order.
It's the fall of the U.S. dominated economy, and the seeds of that were sown almost as soon as Bretton Woods was signed, because the Federal Reserve immediately broke the rule that they weren't supposed to overprint the dollars. That led to the gold crisis, where Nixon had to end gold convertibility. It destroyed itself, and they're trying to blame Russia and China for it. We got to take a break for commercials. Dustin, thank you for the call. We will be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I was just looking at an article. As you know, there's this ongoing debate about raising the minimum wage, and it's going to be a hot-button issue for next year. And common sense has to tell you that this economy is doomed unless there is some mechanism by which ordinary Americans can trade their labor for decent wages and salaries in order to pump that new wealth back into the bottom of the pyramid. You cannot have an economy without that, period, end of discussion. Then, of course, you have the counter-argument coming down from the money junkies about, oh, this will drive us out of business. It'll make what we're doing way too expensive. Well, you know, there's a way to lower prices on your goods, and that's, end all these multi-million, multi-billion-dollar salaries for the executive suite. If you look at the ratio of executive to worker pay in this country, it is way out of line with the rest of the planet. It's not the workers' pay that's causing the high costs. It's those money junkie salaries and bonuses and the accumulating burden of endless interest to the Federal Reserve, because everything's done on credit. Credit line for the inventory, credit line for the transport, credit line for whatever. The banks get a piece of the action of everything going on in this country, and that is a burden the economy cannot support. That's why I keep telling you that nations that are not enslaved to a private central bank are going to be economic powerhouses against which nations with private central banks cannot ever possibly compete. That's why they start wars on them. But we do need to bring the economy back into balance. It's headed in a very bad direction. Everybody knows it, but because of political constraints and greed and the fact that these people in charge of all of this are mentally ill, they're suffering from money addiction, the one mental illness in our society for which they don't have a prescription medication yet. And it is unstable, and it's inherently unstable. Private central banking has no natural stability. And that's where we are right now. Now, as you probably heard on the SRN news break, they are sounding a warning that recipients of disability payments from the government can expect a huge cut because the Social Security Disability Fund has run out of money. It's about out of money, and they're going to have to start taking from the Social Security, the regular trust fund, which means regular Social Security recipients can expect a drop in benefits there as well. Now, what they're not telling you is that this goes all the way back to the Clinton administration, which balanced the federal budget by taking cash out of the Social Security Trust Fund, moving it over to the general ledger and spending it as general revenues. That's where Bill Clinton got his federal budget surplus. He embezzled the money of the American worker. So if the economy's stupid, I did really good. We had a federal budget surplus. We're doing really good over here. And it was all stolen money because that money in the Social Security Trust Fund does not belong to the government. That's your money that you were forced to entrust to the government, and they misused it. They embezzled it. And Clinton called it a loan. He borrowed the money out of Social Security, replaced it with Treasury bonds, and common sense had to tell you, and I made this point back then, if the federal government is borrowing during what we're told are economic boom times, under what circumstances will they be able to pay that money back? And the answer is when the dark regions freeze over. And that down the road, they were either going to raise all the Social Security taxes again, which they've already done, and they were going to start talking about people were going to have to do without the benefits, which is what they're talking about now. Because we can't say bad things about former presidents and the government making a mistake. Oh, no, we've always got to find somebody else to blame for all this. You old people, you're living too long. That's the problem. You should do the patriotic thing and just die as soon as you're no longer able to work. But back when Clinton was in office, there was even a hearing about this, and we linked a part of the transcript to this at WhatReallyHappened.com, where Congress was looking at this and saying this is absolute nonsense to say the federal budget is balanced because they're just taking the money out of Social Security. And the money was there because all the way back in the 1980s, the government knew there was going to be a surge of retirements from the baby boomers, and so they increased Social Security taxes to build up a cash surplus so that they could handle the increased demand for payment. And Bill Clinton got in there and said, look at all that money sitting there doing absolutely nothing. We can do all kinds of good things with that. And they grabbed the money and they spent it as general revenue. Clinton's administration looked good, ended with a federal budget surplus, and the Social Security Trust Fund is filled with a bunch of Treasury bonds nobody can redeem. The U.S. government is already in a state of default on the Treasury bonds. They have defaulted against the American worker because you are the only people who cannot write down the U.S. government's credit rating. That's what's going on. So, anyway, now we're going to take a phone call here. Lenny in, it's either Los Angeles or Louisiana. I'm not sure. Los Angeles. All right. How you doing there, Lenny? What's going on?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
I'm fine. You're on the air. Yes, you're on the air. What's going on?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to say, on your opening comment, you were talking about America's arrogance. And I want to say that I think it's based on two things, ignorance and brutality.
Yes.
Okay, and I think it lends a lot to arrogance, because when you don't know, then might makes right. And that's where we've been for a long time. Now, I've been working lately, and so I have to listen to your podcast when I come home in the evening. And I heard some guy call yesterday, and he suggested you get Joel Skousen on. Let me just say that Joel Skousen believes that Russia was behind the Ukraine coup. So you may not want to waste your time there.
Well, thank you for the warning. You're absolutely right. I don't want anybody on this show that's going to be out there pushing this idea that all of this is Russia's fault. It may be moot anyway if these rumors we're hearing about a revolution against Poroshenko prove to be accurate.
Well, it would only be fair. If one believes in the law of karma, it would only be fair. And another thing I want to comment on is, like I said, I've been working a lot, so I have to listen to your podcast. But this thing about the buggering of children in the UK, now this is just my take on it. You know, I mean, I've often heard you say that you know that there are people who believe in the magic playmate in the sky.
Yes.
Okay, well, there are also people who believe in the opposite, the black magic playmate under the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look into something called the Knights Templars and Scottish Rite Freemasonry, and both of that magic, you might find the answers to some of the questions you're asking concerning that.
I think this is not a factor that goes into the history of the Knights Templar or the legend of Baphomet. I think this is an aspect, a symptom, if you will, of the psychological illness that seems to lead certain individuals to want to have power over everybody else, to want to have vast sums of wealth more than they themselves need. I have come to see it as a sickness, and this desire to have sexual relations with little tiny children, I think, is just part of the symptomology, and because it's just another expression of power, or maybe because these people have such comfortable, privileged lives, it's the only way they can feel a thrill of adrenaline to do something that is that repugnant to most people. But I do think we need to keep attention on it, because it's not just Great Britain. We had the Franklin scandal here in the U.S. It seems to be part of this behavior pattern of these sociopathic personalities that just cannot be happy unless they've got all the wealth and everybody else is poor, and they have all the power and everybody else is helpless. And I think that kind of psychology is hopelessly out of date in any civilization that has reached the stage of having nuclear weapons. It's just a combination that cannot be allowed to coexist. Okay?
Well, like I said, that was just my take on it. But you know, just a suggestion. I have one quick question now.
Well, we're coming up on our Lenny. I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. We're coming up on our news break. If you want to stay on hold, I'll come back to you as soon as we finish the news broadcast. So we'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're going to get back to the phone call we've got on hold here in just a second. Before we do, I want to respond to that story that we just now heard on the SRN news break about how this bridge on the I-10 was washed out by a major flood, and apparently several bridges were damaged. And they're saying that, yes, the bridge was given an A rating a year ago, and the problem was it was a huge amount of water, more than they normally get. So what I am hearing them say is that California is getting a lot of rain. And the reason for the drought isn't because there isn't any rain or human-caused global warming gets the blame for this thing. It's because the infrastructure to capture and use the rainwater is the part that's failing. And we have been talking about this and documenting it for a long time. The aqueduct system has major cracks, losing millions and millions of gallons of usable water into places that don't need it. The water mains underneath Los Angeles are falling apart. They're losing vast amounts of water there. It isn't that there's not enough water. It's that they can't use the water efficiently. But they're going to blame human-caused global warming. All righty, let's see. We're going to grab Lenny in Ohio. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha, and it's Lonnie, but that's okay.
Lonnie, I am sorry there was a mistype on our computer. It's a hardware problem. We've got a loose nut on the keyboard.
Okay. Yes, I was talking with my neighbor just a little bit ago, and I mentioned your show after we were done talking. I told him to tune in. I think Alice Jones might have been a little too much right now for him. But just speaking with him, you know, I kind of asked him a couple questions. And we got around the vaccines. He's like, yeah, I heard there was mercury in vaccines. I was like, okay. And then I was like, what do you know about Benghazi? And he was like, I heard there was weapons or something that was involved in giving away. And I was like, well, okay, you know, you heard about Fast and Furious. You know about vaccines. I mean, you know about the weapons in Benghazi. And are you still going to vote for, you know, Democrats or Hillary Clinton or, you know, the party line, either Republicans or Democrats? And to me, I felt like he came away from the conversation still ready to vote for Hillary, even though he knew, you know, all those things like mercury and vaccines were approved through those same people that they support. And I couldn't understand that. And
well,
also,
you know, he may be coming from the position of there isn't anybody else to vote for. I actually got stopped by a pollster the other day saying going into, you know, it's a little early and everything, but, you know, how are you planning on voting next year? And my reply was for immediate secession, which was not the answer they wanted to hear, by the way. They didn't have a checkbox. I don't have a checkbox for that. I'm sorry, your opinion doesn't count.
Right. Well, I mean, we even mentioned in the conversation, or I mentioned, that, you know, to me, I think the vote or the reason why they let us vote still is it allows them to believe that we give consent for whatever, you know, they decide to do, or if they do something, well, you allow me to do it, it's okay, you know. That's the reason why.
No, the reason for the vote is to create the illusion we're in control, and so whatever they do to us, they can come back and say, look, it's painful, but you voted for this. You know, yes, I'm slapping you in the face and I'm peeing all over you and everything, but hey, this is what you voted for, so you've only got yourself to blame. That's part of the dodge there. Of course, we just saw over in Greece that it doesn't matter what the people are going to vote for. The government's just going to go ahead and do whatever's in their own best interests to do. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show.
And also I wanted to mention, you know, with the propaganda that's out there, you know, the Caitlyn Jenners on SportsCenter or ESPN or whatever, and these celebrities that are out here, or the powers that be, do these people know what's going on? Are they carrying this party line or this propaganda?
They're paid to carry the party line.
Yeah.
I mean, corporate media is a giant selling machine. They are there to sell you this year's cars, this year's politicians, this year's wars, this year's shoes, this year's agenda, and so forth and so on. That's what they're in the business of doing. They don't have any pretensions whatsoever that they're fair, accurate, balanced, honest, or truthful. That's not what they're being paid to do. They're trying to convince you that that's what they're doing, but that's just another part of the sales pitch. Can you believe they're actually going to do a series on the life of Bruce Jenner, and then they wonder why their audience is collapsing?
Oh my goodness. My question is, what are the good guys doing? And honestly, on that last remark you made, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to see that. I don't care. I mean, it doesn't bother me. It's your lifestyle. It's whatever you choose. When I was talking with an individual at work, I brought up RuPaul. I don't know if you remember that gentleman.
I know. Yeah, I know.
Beautiful man. But, I mean, he sold millions of records in the 90s. So, I mean, this is kind of an old issue. It's almost like every political issue they bring up is like recycled, and we keep having to hear about it, and I'm just...
Oh, you want to hear the latest good one? There was a big get-together for the LGBT community, and it's in trouble because the transgendered want to ban the drag queens as being an insult to them.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, what's next? Just sit us in a box and some underwear and then feed us.
Yeah, that's where we're headed. That's where we're headed, definitely on that one.
Michael, I'm a long-time listener, and like I said, I definitely mention you to my neighbors and everybody I talk to.
Well, I appreciate the help. Thank you very much. It's important that we get the word out and get people thinking about what's going on. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And anyway, let's see. I had something else I want to say, and it completely went away, so I got to go back to my talking points here. It's tough getting old. What can I tell you? All right. Now, back to the Donald Trump situation, and you've probably already noticed the corporate media is out there saying Trump is finished, he's over, he's done with, he's insulted an American hero, John McCain, and they're all saying, well, get rid of him. It's the Ron Paul treatment. We recognize it. We saw it in 2008, 2012, and apparently Donald Trump backed off and sort of kind of apologized and said, all right, McCain, he's kind of heroic, but I don't see surrendering and becoming a POW as an act of heroism. And in point of fact, in many armies around the world, if you surrender, it's considered an act of treason. That issue aside, I think Trump has harmed himself, first of all, by backing off a little bit, definitely by letting himself get sucked into personality conflicts and dragged off the issues on which his popularity is built. And I hope somebody in his campaign is going to slap him upside of the head and say, look, get back to these issues about immigration, the economy, and the wars. Don't get dragged into a mudslinging contest because you're outnumbered. However, with Trump now having sort of backed off on the O'Reilly show and said, okay, McCain's cool, that's diffused that situation, but the focus on McCain himself is continuing. It's kicked off a re-examination of this man we are all told was a hero. And all over the independent media we're seeing all these articles bringing back the fact that John McCain was front and center in the concealment from the American people that there were surviving POWs being kept in Vietnam. And McCain was right in the middle of it because the U.S., in order to end the war in Vietnam, had promised billions of dollars of reparations for Vietnam, and they just made a bookkeeping decision. You know something? We're going to save a lot of money if we just let Hanoi keep the POWs and pretend they never existed. That was the calculation. And McCain was in the middle of that. And there's all those other aspects about, you know, the questionable claim that McCain is some kind of a hero. That's going to continue. That's going to grow. And I think McCain's strategy against Trump has backflashed on it. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show here. And even though Trump has diffused the situation regarding John McCain, and McCain made a big stink about how dare you insult them, the name of a national treasure here, John McCain. And Trump has diffused it by apologizing, but the momentum taking a good look at John McCain is continuing, and it is growing. And it's going to backflash on him. And not just him, but all of his supporters. Because they've created this image of John McCain, the hero, and it does not stand up to close inspection. Now, McCain is where he is in part because both his father and his grandfather were 4-star Navy admirals, the top of the heap. And family connection gets you a lot of leeway. Following that disastrous wet start stunt on the USS Forrestal, John McCain was quickly evacuated from the ship to get him away from it. And the military loved to cover things up. In fact, we're going to mention later in the show, Stars and Stripes has a story about the Russian encounter with the USS Donald Cook. Doesn't even mention the Aegis systems were paralyzed. You don't get the straight story from the military about anything. We know that. So there was the disaster of the USS Forrestal, 134 people killed. Goofing off with wet starts, which are very noisy, flame-like affairs that hot dog pilots like to do because they think it's cool. Only this one cooked off a rocket on the plane behind McCain's. That rocket hit McCain's plane. Everything went to heck, and the entire flight deck was caught in the resulting inferno. Then there is, of course, the fact that people who were POWs with McCain are saying he was never tortured. He was treated like royalty because he cooperated with the North Vietnamese. He gave them information that allowed them to improve their air defenses against the U.S., costing other pilots lives, even made propaganda videos for them. Basically, he's a modern Tokyo Rose. But by golly, you will believe this man is a hero because we will tell you to believe that he's a hero. And we know the true nature of this man from the Keating 5 scandal. That's another mark against him. During his aviation career, John McCain crashed 5 U.S. warplanes. That makes him an enemy ace. And finally, all of that other stuff aside, John McCain actually thought Sarah Palin was going to make a good vice president. This guy is a complete fake from beginning to end. Daddy made him a big star in the Navy, got him his pilot slot, and obviously from his actual performance, he wasn't really qualified for that. He's a completely manufactured fake from beginning to end. And that is now becoming a major topic of discussion. And when the American people begin to realize what an absolute fake the image of John McCain is, they're going to start looking at the public image of a lot of other political figures and realize they're also fake, especially Hillary Clinton. Her public image is completely disconnected from the reality. Now, Barack Obama made a interview over on Jon Stewart, and one of the things that he did was to defend the Internal Revenue Service. They're underpaid, they need more money, and at the same time insisting that the targeting of his opponents by the IRS simply did not happen. The fact that he feels he needs to go on out there in his own defense, I think, betrays the realization of just how close the congressional investigation is getting to him. And I would not be surprised if, we know Israel wants Obama out of the White House now. And the Democratic leadership is looking at the absolute wreck Hillary's campaign is turning into, and thinking that the only way they can hang on to the White House is to run Joe Biden, and we're already hearing they're trying to talk him into getting into the race next year. And the way to guarantee that Biden would be a viable electable candidate for the White House is if he's already sitting in that Oval Office. And I would almost be willing to wager a plugged Turkish piastre that we're going to see a move to impeach Barack Obama in the coming months. Get him out of there, get Biden the position of being the incumbent running for office, and go into the convention from a position of strength. And the fact that Obama's out there defending the allegations that he used the IRS as a weapon, and there's a compelling amount of evidence that he did, and it was an article of impeachment against Richard Nixon. So, anyway, now somebody put up a rather interesting little comparison about Barack Obama's priorities, and it was basically a picture of the White House. And the first picture is the White House lit with the rainbow colors to celebrate the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, which took only 2 days for the White House to do, which involves going out and buying a lot of extension cords and light bulbs. And pointing out it took 5 days for the White House to lower the flags to half-staff following the Chattanooga shooting. And it does seem like quite a few multiple standards going on over there. Now, over in Germany, there's a lawyer who's representing the families of the people who died on Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, and he is getting ready to sue Ukraine, Kiev, for the crash. Not because he's got proof they shot the plane down, but because from a purely jurisdictional point of view, they were in control of the airspace where the aircraft was sent. And knowing that a plane had been shot down in the same area a week ago, should have diverted the plane, and did not. And so he's suing Kiev on that basis. And I'm hoping this will stir the pot and more will come out. The reality is there's no question that this was used as a propaganda weapon against Putin and against Russia. May have been an attempt to assassinate Putin that went horribly, horribly wrong, because Putin's presidential plane and Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 looked very similar from a distance. Passenger jets painted red, white, and blue. And Putin's plane was in the same area at the same time. So we'll see what's going on there. We are still seeing the aftermath of the Chattanooga shooting, and remember, it is now confirmed that the shooter in Chattanooga who shot up these military recruiting stations was off and on prescription antidepressants for a long time before this. And remember, it's when you're withdrawing from these that you're most at risk for unexplained acts of violence. But the politics are still going on. More when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about the aftermath of the Chattanooga shooting and some very bizarre examples of how political correctness seems to have gone off the deep end. Because there is a ban against military people carrying weapons on their places of employment, bases, so forth. And it seems rather silly unless you look at a government that's just as afraid of the military rank and file as they are of ordinary citizens. So there was this idea that maybe the recruiters, who are in fact potential targets because of the opposition to the war, maybe ought to be allowed to carry weapons in the recruiting centers. Not necessarily out on the street, but in the recruiting centers. And the Pentagon basically came back and said, absolutely not. We're going to recommend that our recruiters follow the advice of the Department of Homeland Security. Close the blinds so you cannot be seen from the outside. And if somebody comes in the door with a gun, grab a pair of scissors and stab them. But I'm not kidding you. This was the recommendation from the Department of Homeland Security to ordinary American people in the wake of all these mass shootings, and they said, let us carry guns. No, you don't need guns. You've got things right there like scissors. You can defend yourself with scissors against a guy with his brain melted on prescription psychiatric drugs who's got a gun with a illegally long clip. I mean, that's how bizarre it is. Now, in those parts of the country where the gun laws allow citizens to carry weapons, volunteers have stepped forward to act as guards on the military recruiting centers because the Pentagon is saying they may not defend themselves. So we now have citizens guarding the trained military, which shows you how through the looking glass we are. The Department of Defense has responded by ordering that any citizens seeking to protect the recruiting centers with their own legally owned firearms should be arrested on the spot. Meanwhile, we have another story of a veteran from Vietnam. Don Rogers was at a gas station when somebody walked in demanding the cash, waving a gun around, and our Vietnam veteran shot the robber. The robber fled empty-handed, was eventually forced to call 911 himself because of the serious injuries. And it's just a reminder, the police are never there in time to thwart a crime. They certainly weren't at the church in Charleston, certainly were not in Chattanooga. They're great at showing up after it's all over and posing with the dead bodies for the newspaper photographers, but that's about all they're good for. Plus looting the population with all these civil forfeiture, traffic tickets, and the rest of it. The only people who can stop these crimes in progress are the people who are the intended victims, whether it's a military recruiter or an ordinary citizen. And that is the one thing the government will not allow because they are scared out of their minds of an armed populace with the right and the means to say no more. Now, as part of his interview on Jon Stewart, they were talking about gun control, and Jon Stewart came back to President Obama. If you're going to take away Americans' guns, you'd better act quickly. Because people are getting angry out here. And I'm not encouraging violence. This revolution is being won with keyboards, not with firearms. And the government is prepared to put down a revolution with firearms or Molotov cocktails or the rest of it. What they can't deal with, have never been able to deal with, is 300 million Americans finally realizing the true nature of what the government of the United States of America has become. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Paul in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I'm calling to inquire whether you've been following what Stephen Cohen, professor from Princeton on Russian studies, has been saying about Ukraine.
Not specifically. What is he saying?
He's exactly. You were saying exactly what his analysis has said last night, and it's kind of a promotion in a sense because I listen to it weekly. He's on the John Batchelor show on WABC Radio in New York City at 10 o'clock in the evening, New York time. So I suggest your listeners to tune in because it's a very objective analysis of what is going on in Ukraine. And what he said last night is basically Ukraine is being colonized by American troublemakers. As a matter of fact, right now, Victoria Nuland is omnipresent in the Rada, sitting there observing all the government workings going on as the government in Ukraine struggles trying to avoid enacting the Minsk agreements. And that's basically what's going on. He also said that Putin has been basically trying to prevent the conflict. He's been actually telling the separatists that, no, you are not joining Russia. You're going to be either a separate country of your own if you can make that happen, but we would prefer you remain part of Ukraine. You are Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. So it basically, what Cohen has been saying is undoes all the propaganda by the Russophobes out there who, haven't updated their Cold War playbooks. So many people, we were told in the late 90s that, the Soviet Union fell, which it did. And yet so many people think that Russia is the Soviet Union. They
that's deliberate.
Exactly, and Russia was just as much a victim of the Soviet takeover as all the satellite countries that comprised the Soviet Union. The Russian people were just as much a victim of Soviet aggression and Soviet totalitarianism. And so I think many Americans have the absolute wrong view, and I think this is provided by the neocons themselves, who are the basic agitators for this conflict against Russia. Because, Russia has been a thorn in the side of Israel's ambitions in the Middle East in, prolonging the conflict in Syria.
Well, Russia and China are both a thorn in the side of the neocons because they stopped doing what the U.S. wanted them to do. I mean, the United States and Russia were all buddy-buddy and a lot of trade going on, and everybody was having a really good time up until the moment Putin took control of Russia's central bank and said, we're going to run the economy of Russia for the benefit of Russia and the Russian people. And that was the day when Russia, and especially Putin, got put on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list.
Exactly, Michael. And have you noticed that America goes forward into the world claiming how it's such an advocate of global capitalism, yet once the Russians or the Chinese start succeeding and actually outplaying and beating the United States in the capitalist free market game, then all of a sudden the United States has to, make trouble in their backyard, has to, try to cause trouble in Ukraine. The United States is now, trying to play games with China. A while ago it was in Hong Kong, trying to stir up a color revolution there, right?
Yes.
And so at one moment we advocate, capitalism and free trade, and that what a benefit that would be for the world. But once we end up losing, and it's all our fault that we are losing, since we don't have tariffs and we allow these technology transfers, right?
Yes.
But as soon as Russia's starting to get wealthy, it seems like Joe Biden wants his son to go over there and start fracking in Ukraine and to basically turn off the Russian pipeline into Europe.
Well, they're all looking to make as much money off of these problems as they can create there. I think Joe Biden's son is there for purely monetary reasons, less having to do with foreign policy. But you're absolutely right. The United States has lost its ability to compete as a manufacturing and agricultural power. The only way they can cling to their control over the world is to go out and bomb anybody else doing a better job at manufacturing and agriculture. Paul, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Looking through the headlines coming on in. A couple of people are sending me stories coming in from Russia today that it does look like there is a rapidly emerging movement within Kiev to kick out their U.S. puppet rulers and have another Ukrainian revolution. And, of course, the Western media is calling this movement the ultra-right nationalists. They're basically labeling them as neo-Nazis because that's the name you use on somebody you don't agree with. And have you noticed how nationalism is now being demonized? All nationalism is saying we got to take care of our country first, which is certainly what the U.S. has been doing. But nationalism is, of course, contrary to the wishes of the people who want a single global government, a single global private central bank, and all of humankind as debt slaves for the rest of our time on Earth until either we go extinct or the sun swallows the planet. That's basically what's going on there. But it does look like there's a huge amount of anger building around Kiev. And so Victoria Nuland's got more pressing things to worry about than whether or not they can recapture the eastern Ukrainian republics. For one thing, the current regime in Kiev is hovering on the edge of their own economic default. So that's coming apart. Latest poll is showing Donald Trump's poll numbers are double those of Jeb Bush, who's in second place. And yet we're seeing all over the news, oh, there's no way Trump could ever win. Everybody thinks he's a joke. And yet he's polling. He's polling double the numbers of his nearest competitor. But they don't want him there because he's not going to play the game by the rules they think he ought to. So we'll see what's going to happen there. But they're going to give him the Ron Paul treatment. And if that doesn't work, they'll give him the Robert Kennedy treatment. Now, then there's an interesting little article that came out over in Russia today looking at the United States Supreme Court and noticing that even though the rules of the court say that the Supreme Court justices should recuse themselves from cases involving companies with which they're financially entangled, they don't actually do it. The judges will stay there ruling on cases involving companies they themselves own stock in, and, not too surprisingly, 90% of the time, they will rule in favor of those companies. It really is insanely corrupt all the way from top to bottom. And in the blueprint for the New America, I think that we ought to have the idea of a blind trust apply not just to the president, but to all members of the legislative body and to these justices on the Supreme Court. And if you don't want to live that way, then find another line of employment. But the system is set up to encourage corruption, and not surprisingly, that's what we're getting. Now, even the corporate media is noticing this one. I got the story off of Ben Norton. Apparently, it's also over on Ben Swan's website. It's going all over the place, and it has to do with this video of the arrest of Sandra Bland. Now, Bland was a 28-year-old Black Lives Matter civil rights activist, critic of police brutality, as we all are, who died in police custody after a Texas officer pulled her over on a traffic violation, ordered her out of her car when she refused to put out her cigarette, and arrested her. And later on, she died. Now, the police say that Bland committed suicide while in their custody just to make them look bad. The Waller County prosecutor is saying the case is being treated as a murder investigation. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Texas Department of Public Safety uploaded what they claimed was the dash cam police video of the arrest to YouTube back on the 21st, yesterday, in fact, to try and say this is all that happened. And almost immediately, people looked at it and said, this has been edited. There are jumps in the action. There are obviously pieces of the video that are being looped and reused to hide what's going on. It's been edited to time out with the audio recording of the police radio traffic, but it's obviously been edited. And I looked at it myself, and yes, there's no question it's been edited. Now, the police department involved has issued a statement saying that the video only looks edited because of problems uploading the dash cam video from the police car to the police computer. You know how flaky the internet things are. Look what happened to that Rivero guy out in Hawaii yesterday. That's their excuse. That portions of the video are repeating and looping over and over again because of an upload problem. It doesn't work that way. I've worked enough in video and with data uploads to understand if there's a problem with the data upload, you don't get the data. It doesn't move it around. The stuff doesn't work like that. So we've got another cover-up going on over there. Now, over at Investment Watch blog, they've got an interesting article that raises a question. All corporate media, should they be on trial for purposefully lying and creating non-existent events, false flags like we saw in Boston, Charleston, Chattanooga, 9/11 itself? And it's a nice idea, but under current U.S. law, it's not going to happen. And the reason for this goes back to the Fox News synthetic bovine growth hormone lawsuit. And that case was very educating and enlightening about the reality of corporate media in this country. The situation was Fox News took two of their top reporters and said, we want you to do a story on the benefits of Monsanto's synthetic bovine growth hormone. These two reporters went out and almost immediately started finding indications that there were some serious problems with this particular product, that people who were eating dairy products or meat harvested from cows treated with this hormone were suffering serious medical effects. So they came back with the story, and Fox News, which gets millions and millions of dollars from Monsanto for TV advertising, said, you can't do this. You got to change it. And the reporters stood firm, and Fox News fired them. The reporters sued Fox News for wrongful termination and lost on appeal when the courts ruled that because there is no law saying that the corporate media has to tell you the truth about anything, corporate media has a legal right to order their employees to lie to you, the public, and has a right to fire any of their employees for refusing to do so. And that is all you need to know about the American corporate media. There is no law that says they must be truthful. They can legally order their reporters to lie to you. They can fire those reporters who refuse to do so. So you just keep that in mind when you look at the corporate media and it says Putin is doing this, he's bad, Iran has got nuclear weapons, Iraq's got nuclear weapons, and the rest of it. These are not truthful people. Look at Brian Williams. Proven liar in the public eye. He still has his job for $8 million a year because he's paid to be a very convincing liar. People who tell the truth, they don't get any money. Nobody wants to pay anybody for the truth. The big money goes to the liars who will help them become bigger money. That is what corporate media is all about. You know, the days when we had people who actually thought the media should be truthful, like Murrow, those are gone. And remember how Edward R. Murrow got treated for going up against Senator McCarthy. And it was clear Murrow was right, McCarthy was wrong. Murrow lost his job, lost his show, was kicked out. And that tells you all you need to know about CBS. George Clooney did a really good movie on what happened to Edward R. Murrow. Good night and good luck, which was Murrow's catchphrase. Might want to take a look at that sometime. We're going to take a break for our news, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm looking at the political circus, at least as shown to us by Fox News. And the latest polls are showing that Americans view Hillary Clinton as untrustworthy by close to a 2-to-1 margin. And no real surprise. Anybody paying attention knows what's going on here. Hillary Clinton's campaign is trying to counter that by going back to this whole gender card that anybody who's opposed to Hillary Clinton just hates women. You know, Hillary didn't do anything wrong whatsoever. People who are opposed to her, they're part of the vast right-wing conspiracy against women, and women are oppressed, and this abuse of Hillary is proof of that. Blah, 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 blah. So, as I mentioned earlier in the show, there's been finally over in Stars and Stripes a report on the incident that took place a while back where the USS Donald Cook was up in the Black Sea thumping its chest and strutting around about how power projecting they really are, and a single Russian Sukhoi aircraft flew toward the Donald Cook, and the entire Aegis computer system inside the Donald Cook shut down and stayed completely paralyzed while this Russian plane made 12 simulated attack runs against the ship and then flew away. The Donald Cook returned to port. Rumors were the crew was completely demoralized because they'd suffered from Aegis arrogance. We can go anywhere and do whatever we want. We've even got our own TV show, The Last Ship. And basically got shut down because the reality is that American-produced computer systems, military or civilian, really aren't very good. Now, the Stars and Stripes article, continuing in a fine tradition of not reporting everything about the story, wrote the story simply as, how dare this Russian fighter fly close to us? It was a provocation. The Russian fighter provocatively came close to the U.S. Donald Cook, not a mention about the paralysis of the Aegis defense system, which is the reason for being for the entire ship. The ship exists solely as a platform to carry this Aegis fleet defense system, the spy radars, the targeting radars, and the standard missiles. That's it. Without that working, there really isn't much point to have the ship out there. Now, over in Russia, the Moscow Mint has issued a USS Donald Cook commemorative coin. Its official title is The Lesson of Peace, and on the coin you see the Sukhoi and the Donald Cook, and on the reverse it's got some symbology about electronic warfare. I saw one already for sale over on eBay. I think it's a little overpriced. I've got people in Russia saying it doesn't really cost that much. This is the Moscow Mint, which is the official mint for all of the awards and medals and everything the Russian government gets out. You gotta love the Russian sense of humor. And if I can get my hands on one, I'm going to, because that's it. That you have to admire the grace and humor there for the commemorative coin. Now, getting on back to corruption and politics and abuse of things here in the United States. Actually, we're going to take a phone call, I think. We're going to go to Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha, Michael Rivero.
It's Rivero, without an accent. I'm from Boston. I'm from Boston, no accent. Okay.
You have not been mentioning of late, and I think it is so important because the Glenn Act and the Symington Amendment, and that Israel doesn't play nice with its neighbors, and that they won't draw their borders, and that they don't allow inspections, and yet we keep sending them money. And I called last week using that very information to call all my representatives, because Langford came on and he was just spewing about how we needed to take care of the situation over there because it was dangerous and they were creating nuclear bombs, the Iranians, and it was like, what? These are all the same people who claimed Saddam was building nuclear bombs. That turned out to be a lie. And I used also your information saying I do not elect these representatives go and spew lies in front of us. And that's all that was, is a whole bunch of lies. And then I used your Symington Amendment and Glenn Act that we continue to send $50 billion without fail every year when we need it more. And they all shut up, except for Imhoff's representative, and he just said, that's our allies. They've been our allies for 50 years, and they are our only allies. So I thought I'd share that.
Which is going to annoy the heck out of Saudi Arabia, which sees themselves as our allies. But, the bottom line is, because the official position of the government is that Israel is a weak, helpless country that doesn't have nuclear weapons, or we don't know that they do. I think it's more pertinent to say, hey, look, your job, elected by the American people and paid from American tax dollars, is to take care of this country. Okay? You don't have your job is not to worry about Israel and slapping down Israel's enemies, because Israel is creating enemies faster than we can kill them off. It's a waste of time. Your job is right here. And if you don't want to focus your efforts right here in the United States of America, have the decency to resign and make way for somebody who's going to put America first, second, and third. You put them on the spot for that. There's no official view of history where they can come away from that, and just say, Israel's our ally. And you can say, look, Israel may be your ally, and if you really believe that, move there, run for the Knesset, and take care of that country. But your job as an American, congressman is to take care of this country first and foremost. And just put them on the spot.
Yeah, and I didn't think of the USS Liberty and how they attacked us and claimed that they were Egypt, but, you know, I just really think that needs to be brought up like you used to bring it up every single day almost. And
well, you know, there were other things on the talking points today. We did talk about Israel. We talked about how Israel, you know, is moving away from killing the Iran deal to try and get governments to cut financial funding to any organization anywhere in the world that Israel deems to be anti-Israel, which is, you know, raising on a busted flush here, because I think everybody's really getting sick and tired of Israel acting like they're lords of the universe, you know, just because they're good buddies with the private central bankers.
I don't think we should send them a penny ever again for the ever.
I agree. And I'll go you one better. You know, Israel's always screaming that the world owes them money because of whatever it is that's supposed to happen in World War II. Well, I've read a little history about World War II. The United States sacrificed blood and treasure to stop the Nazis from completing whatever it was Israel says they were trying to do. Israel owes us, not the other way around.
Well, I'm ready for that, considering our bridges and our dams and everything. But I just thought I'd put that plug nickel in there for all it's worth, because I think it's very important that we already have laws that we're not supposed to be sending them money because they don't allow inspections. And that's so huge because they're the ones that have all the nuclear bombs, and Iran doesn't.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, you know, the fact of the matter is the U.S. government can hide behind the official position that we don't know that Israel has nuclear weapons. But, I mean, we've got the paperwork from South Africa. We've got the photos from Mordecai Vanunu. We've got statements by members of the Israeli government itself that just show the official view is an absolute joke. And we've got to start rubbing their noses in it to let them know we know they're full of USDA choice bovine excrement. Andrea, thank you for the phone call. We're going to kick you loose, and we'll be right back after these commercials. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over the last several months, we have been talking about the evils of civil forfeiture in this country. It's been going on for a very long time. Like so many other evil things, it started very small. The idea of civil forfeiture was to take the proceeds of crime and turn it against the criminals by using it to fund expanded law enforcement. That was the original sales pitch. Since then, of course, it's come out that the vast majority of civil forfeiture is being carried out against people innocent of any wrongdoing whatsoever. That they're being targeted not because they're involved in criminal enterprise, but because they're vulnerable. There's an opportunity. Let's grab the money and hang on to most of it, and we'll worry about criminality later. As civil forfeiture has grown, direct funding from government to law enforcement has been cut back to the point where the police are now dependent on grabbing this money under the flimsiest of excuses. And that's not law enforcement, it's not crime control, it's pillage of the population. Now, I'm looking at this story. This came out of newsforge.com, and there's a big scandal down there because a lot of the wealth confiscated under civil forfeiture by Oklahoma law enforcement has gone missing. And somebody launched an investigation. They found out one of the prosecutors in Oklahoma was using civil forfeiture money to pay off their student loans. Another one lived rent-free in a home confiscated under civil forfeiture for years. The system is being abused, and even worse, it's not accomplishing its stated goal. Just like gun control doesn't disarm the criminals. Obamacare didn't really make health care more affordable. It's just another excuse by predatory government to take more from us. Because you're not willing to give it to us voluntarily. Look at all those clever lies we've crafted, like human-caused global warming, and you still won't give us your money, well, we're just going to have to come out and take it. Now, as you know, there is a big stink over these videos that have come out of Planned Parenthood confirming that the aborted fetuses are carved up and sold piecemeal to scientific research companies. And it's an ugly story. Now, I understand the timing of this seems intended to kick up abortion as another election year fringe issue. And I would be tempted to ignore it, except that I do find the whole idea very ghoulish. And yes, the GOP is now coming out and saying funding for Planned Parenthood should be cut off. Yeah, they're raking in the bucks out the back door, selling off the bits and pieces. There's a list of 40 companies posted at WhatReallyHappened.com that donate directly to Planned Parenthood in order to provide abortions to women who didn't want to bother taking their pills and got caught. Adobe Software donates to Planned Parenthood. The American Cancer Society does. American Express, AT&T, Bank of America, Ben & Jerry's, Clorox, Coca-Cola, Deutsche Bank, Energizer, Fannie Mae. Gee, Fannie Mae's in trouble. Why are they donating to Planned Parenthood? Johnson & Johnson, Intuit, Starbucks, PepsiCo, Oracle, Verizon, Wells Fargo. It's not the complete list. You can go on the website and read them. But once again, we find out one of these benevolent organizations isn't really as benevolent as we thought here. All right, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing good.
One is that thing about the bovine growth hormone that's used. And what year was that? And where was? And do you remember who the news reporters were for Fox?
They still have a website out there, and see if I can find it real quick here. Jane Aker was one of the reporters involved, and there's a website, and it's foxbghsuit.com, and it has all the story about what's going on there. And this all happened back in 2003. The actual story was started in 1997 by this reporting team. And it dragged on for years and years until Fox fired them. Then they sued. They actually won the initial court decision for wrongful termination. Fox appealed on the basis that they're under no legal obligation to tell the truth to anybody, and they won on appeal on that argument. And since then, they were trying to spin and dodge and saying, no, it doesn't really mean we have a legal right to lie, and it doesn't mean that we lie. You're supposed to believe we report, you decide. And yet, obviously, the reality is somewhat different.
Well, then that goes to show you that I've lost respect for Fox News already for quite a while. By the way, I make sure whenever milk products I get, like yogurt and stuff, it's bovine-free.
Hormone-free. It's getting harder and harder to find that stuff because they're getting laws passed in a lot of states, and now they're moving to the national level where you can't label whether this stuff is or is not. I mean, right now there's a ban on mandatory GMO labeling. They're going to follow it up with a law saying you can't have a label saying GMO-free. That's the only way they can guarantee their mercantilism approach to forcing us to buy from the favored companies. You're not allowed to know what's in there.
Okay, I called my Congressman, Mark Meadows, about that today. I said, make sure you don't vote for that. I mean, I tell the people. But, I mean, the fact that they can do this goes to show you that basically this government is at war with us. It's just like you said with the police also with their, with seizing asset forfeitures and all that. They're at war. This government is at war with us. And
well, look at the definition of what fascism is. Fascism is when governmental power and corporate power is allied together against the general population. That's not my definition. That's Benito Mussolini, who won the Olympic gold medal for being a fascist jerk. And that's where we are right now. Government is clearly allied with the money interests against the interest of the general public. Their opposition to GMO labeling right there is proof of that.
I mean, they're actually assaulting us, though. They're trying to commit harm on us. That's basically what it comes to. And as far as Fox News goes, I think people should understand. Fox News is a bad joke. It is.
They all are. They all are. Corporate news doesn't tell you the truth about anything except the weather and the sports scores, and they're not even that good on the weather. Mark, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and along with Obamacare, we're talking about how completely out of control hospital costs are in this country. Cost of medication, cost of treatment, cost of whatever. And it's gotten so bad that the U.S. government has now actually passed laws against what is called medical tourism, which is where people will fly to other countries where they can get the exact same or even better quality medical treatment at a much, much lower cost. And they're blocking it. A lot of people who live in the northern part of the United States would drive over to Canada to buy their prescription medications, and the U.S. government came back, those Canadian medications, we can't guarantee the safety. They may not be the same quality as the American pharmaceuticals. Then we all find out they're all coming from the same factories in China, whether it's U.S. or Canada. And now they've passed laws against that. It's against the law in a lot of places for people in the southern part of the U.S. to go into Mexico for dental treatment, go to other countries. It's all about protecting the profits of the medical industrial complex. Mandatory vaccine laws, the latest expression of that. You will buy what we tell you to buy from who we tell you to buy it from. That's mercantilism. So there was this interesting article that was over in Oraz.com about an individual who got bit by a rattlesnake, which happens out west a lot, and went to the hospital, got treated for it, and wound up with a bill for a rattlesnake bite of $153,000. Now, I remember when I was a Boy Scout, you could buy a little kit to treat a rattlesnake bite for $2. Keep it in your little backpack there, little suction cups and razor blades and stuff. For those of you watching on BAM User, last rattlesnake tried to bite me is now this wallet. Rattlesnake pissed me off. It is out of control. What is going on is that all of these medical facilities have to cut deals with the insurance companies. To be a provider on this insurance program, they have to offer generous discounts. So what they do is they simply run up the price schedule, so they're still getting the same money from the insurance company that they would have anyway, with the net result that the actual tourist prices for ordinary people, especially if you don't have insurance or your insurance refuses to pay it, is just completely out of control. I remember one time, quite some time ago, my wife came down with an infection in her women area. I don't need to go into more details. And we knew exactly what it was, but it was the Friday for a holiday weekend, and her normal medical provider, who was on her insurance, had gone for the holiday weekend. That was it. So we took her over to the emergency room over here at Polymomi. And all we did is we walked in, we said, this is not an emergency. She's dealing with this infection. It takes this medication to fix. The doctor looked at her, said, yes, you've got the infection. Here's the prescription for the medication. $900 bill. And we told the guy what was wrong and how to fix it. Now, of course, the medical industrial complex is whining and complaining that people are not going in for medical checks anymore. They're not going in for minor illnesses or injuries. They're losing business because the prices are so high, people can't go in. Those new Obamacare policies have sky-high deductibles. Most people who've been forced to buy these Obamacare policies will never actually get to use them unless they have a serious illness or injury. The ordinary medical annoyances you deal with during the course of a year will not reach the top of that deductible. That money you have been forced to spend on this policy is completely wasted money to you. Pure profit for the health insurance companies. Another example of the fascism that we are descending into. Now then, the United States has been screaming that China was behind this recent hack of the Office of Personnel Management. Oh, it was the Chinese. The Chinese did it. The Chinese are evil. They're always doing this kind of thing. Reuters is now reporting that the U.S. government does not officially blame China for the hack. Not official. We'll do it in the media. We'll smear China left and right, up and down, front, back, and sideways in the media over this, but officially we don't know where the hack came from. But you should sneer at the Chinese anyway. That's how badly disconnected the official position is from the reality. And again, going back to Israel's nuclear weapons, it's the official position of the United States government that we don't know if Israel does or does not have nuclear weapons, and we can't find out. Even though it means that the billions of taxpayer dollars flowing to Israel might actually be illegal under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act. We're not going to bother checking. It's not that much money after all. We've got better things to do with our time. And yet, in the real world, we have Mordecai Vanun's photos of Israel's bomb factory underneath Dimona. Israeli TV actually did a documentary about it. Israel's bomb factory. We have the documents from the former government of South Africa. Israel's been out there selling clandestine nuclear weapons to the rest of the world. The very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. We have statements by people within Israel. Yeah, we got nuclear weapons. Deal with it. But officially, we're still being ambiguous, and we should all conform with the official view of reality and forget the real world. The official view is that humans are warming the earth, and really you're being politically incorrect looking at all that ice and snow and everything. Now, this one actually made the corporate media. Not too long ago, there was a video that was put out showing how computer hackers inside a car were able to take control of the car away from the driver. It was one of these ultra-modern cars with automatic parking and all the other bells and whistles, and by plugging into the data port, which is now standard on all cars, it's where that little price measuring gizmo from Progressive plugs in that will destroy your onboard computer. Now they've managed to do it over the wireless networks, the cell phone system and the rest of it, where they can now take control of Chrysler cars from thousands of miles away. These are wide open, which is why if I ever get the money for a new car, I don't want one with a computer in there. I'll take a GPS because I can't use my cell phone GPS without getting a $280 ticket here in Hawaii. But I don't want a computer that's able to drive the car for me. I want simple, elegant, workable, easy to fix, not all these whiz-bangs. The more they put this computer stuff in there, the more wide open we are to nefarious actions. There are a lot of people who think Michael Hastings was murdered by somebody remotely hijacking the computer on his car and driving him into a tree at high speed. Now, over at LifeLock, you've seen all their commercials all over the place. We're going to protect you from identity theft, and apparently LifeLock's stock lost half its value because the Federal Trade Commission has come out with an accusation that LifeLock violated a previous 2010 settlement regarding making deceptive claims about what its services can do and failing to actually take steps to protect their users' data. Now, I'll tell you how we can cut the identity theft problem in half. Find one identity thief, crucify them live on national TV. If they're reasonably healthy, it's going to take them at least a week to die. That's going to end half the identity theft problem. And when we fire the National Security Agency, that'll get rid of the other half. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take one final phone call for our program today. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show.
Top news.
Hang on a second. That was my fault. And aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Talking of this hack of the car, this was known about years ago. They called it the Boston Chauffeur. This was developed by the Special Air Service to take out Princess Diana. And that's why they wouldn't let Mercedes anywhere near that car that crashed in the tunnel because it was deliberately crashed using this method. But anyway, we'll get on to another thing. Talking about Israel and its nuclear arsenal, are we really serious that GCHQ, that has a huge tower on the top of a huge dome on top of Mount Troodos, listening to everything, and obviously the NSA, I mean, are these people a complete waste of time? All the communications between the government and Dimona, I mean, they must have intercepted. They must know for certain that Israel has these nuclear weapons.
No. GCHQ and NSA are not listening to the communications of governments, real criminals, and real terrorists because we already proved it is trivial to come up with new code systems they can't crack. And I'm sure that our government and Israel's government and all these governments have got secure communications. The NSA and the GCHQ are there to keep an eye on the law-abiding citizen to make sure they are not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts.
They're not doing very well then because they must be a waste.
No, they're just annoying the heck out of us. I mean, look at this whole thing. All the missing emails from Lois Lerner, all the missing emails from Hillary's email server. The NSA should have them. They don't. The NSA is there to keep watch on us serfs to make sure we are not becoming unhappy in our serfdom.
Oh, right, yes. And one of the things, the last thing I wanted to comment on is this really serious downturn in the Ukraine for the Kiev government. I mean, it's looking very delicate. It could go either way at any time. And it looks like the overthrow of the elected government by Victoria Nuland and co. is not being very successful, so I think we can mark this one down as failure.
We're seeing that everywhere the U.S. has done this in the last 10 years. They go in, put in a puppet government, the people get sick of it and kick it out because the world now understands this is what's been going on since the end of World War II. And as a foreign policy tool, it worked as long as the people of a country didn't recognize an outsider's hand in the replacement of their nation. But especially starting with the Iranian Revolution of 1979, where the Iranian people said, we didn't want the Shah. This guy was put in here by the U.S. back in 1953. More and more of these countries are saying, this is not our government in control of this place. It's a foreign puppet ruler. We're seeing that in Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya. The people of Syria understand that the U.S. is not coming in to save them from Assad, but to put them under another U.S. puppet ruler. We're having to go into Iraq for the third time under the pretext of fighting ISIS. And we could see Kiev fall to the Ukrainian people. How is the U.S. government going to sell a second incursion into Ukraine? We've got to save the people of Ukraine from their own government. And, it is wearing thin. They're probably going to say ISIS is behind whatever's going on in Ukraine. I mean, ISIS is now the one catch-all excuse for whatever they're doing. Go into a country, set up an ISIS scarecrow, bomb the heck out of the place, take the ISIS scarecrow and leave. That's what they're doing. John, I need to let you go. We got two more stories I want to cover before we reach the end of the program. And one of them is online about this hacking issue because, as you know, there was this company called the Hacking Group in Europe that sells commercial hacking tools to repressive dictatorships around the world, including the United States of America. One of the products that came out when their own computers were hacked, because apparently they didn't think they needed to worry about security over there, were plans for a drone to be built with by the hacking team and Boeing aircraft that would fly over neighborhoods to infect people's computers over their Wi-Fi ports. Now, this tells us that the Wi-Fi ports are backdoored. Yes, there are a lot of people who get a Wi-Fi router and they leave the default password and they're not that concerned about security. But you can go in and change that password. You can put in all the secure passwords, WEP and so forth. You can do MAC address filtering that says only these recognized devices can come on, but for Boeing and Hacking Group to be building a drone to hack your computer over Wi-Fi and for governments being ready to buy it tells us that the Wi-Fi system itself has been backdoored by the NSA, so they can come and go as they want, and so too can all the cyber criminals who find that back door. Far from making America's IT infrastructure more secure, the NSA has left us wide open to anybody on the planet who wants to come in and take a look, whether it's the Office of Management and Personnel, Hillary Clinton's email server, or anything else whatsoever. So, basically at this point, the United States is acting like they are organized crime. So let's get on down to human-caused global warming, because we are seeing this media saturation campaign all over that 2015 is the hottest year on record. Yes, we said that about 2014, but this year's hotter. Next year will be hotter. Broiling, broiling, broiling. Heat, heat, heat. You're all going to die unless you pay carbon tax. Meanwhile, up in Canada, there is a ship, the CCGS Amundsen. It is a Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker. It was beginning a 115-day scientific expedition to study the impact of global warming on the Arctic ice cap, which the carbon Nazis have been saying has virtually disappeared, and we've been telling you is thicker and harder than it has been for a great many years. And guess who got proven to be right? Because this expedition has had to be called off. The ice is so thick, this icebreaker can't get through it. They're having to go around, and now the expedition has been called off completely because this icebreaker is now needed to open up ice for commercial shipping that is getting locked in the ice. This is like that embarrassment last year down in Antarctica. We're going in to get pictures of melting Antarctic ice to prove everyone the globe is warming, and then they got trapped and had to be rescued. The captain of the Amundsen is saying this is the worst icing they've seen in the Arctic in the last 20 years. And still, the corporate media is trying to convince you this is the hottest year on record if you don't include 1936, the medieval and Roman warming periods, and if you don't bother averaging in those record cold winters we just went through. And if you only look at the temperature coming in from those airport thermometers surrounded by aircraft belching out tons of burning kerosene, then yes, we've got record high temperatures. Out in California, they're looking at a $1.5 million fine for stealing water. Kind of tense out there. Now, earlier this week, there was this bridge on the I-10 got washed out in a rain. They've announced today they're going to reopen it in record time. They're really putting the effort in there. But you're looking at it was washed out in a flood. I thought California was in a drought. And what they're telling us here is they're getting rain in California. The part that isn't working is the infrastructure to capture, control, and use the water is falling apart. And as confirmation, we're looking at this article from the Daily Mail. Freak July rainfall in California pounds the state, extinguishing wildfires and boosting water levels. The drought would be over if it weren't for all the leaks in the aqueducts and the water mains. So, climate's what you expect, weather is what you get. Story coming out of NIST, apparently one of their scientists was using their lab to make meth and blew it up. No arrest, no charges. Now you know why NIST thinks the world is getting warmer. We'll be back. Well, okay, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get something useful done. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, please call your local talk radio stations. Call WABC in New York. Ask them to carry our programming. Point them at gcnlive.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.